I've always had vivid dreams, the kind where you wake up and can recall every detail. By the time I was 16, I taught myself to lucid dream, to become aware I was dreaming and take control. It started as a fun escape, like having my own personal holodeck every night. Then the sleep paralysis began. The first time it happened, I woke to find myself completely frozen, unable to move a single muscle. A dark figure stood in the corner of my bedroom watching me. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. After what felt like hours, I finally broke free, gasping and trembling. Sleep paralysis is just a glitch in the sleep cycle, doctors told me. Your mind wakes before your body. The hallucinations are just dreams overlapping with reality. Nothing to worry about. But the episodes kept coming, and the shadowy figures became more numerous, more detailed. They would gather around my bed, whispering in languages I couldn't understand. One night during a particularly intense episode, I had a realization. If sleep paralysis was just a dream state overlapping with wakefulness, couldn't I control it like my lucid dreams? The next time it happened, when the dark figures appeared, I didn't fight the paralysis. Instead, I focused my mind like I did in lucid dreams. I can move, I told myself. This is my dream. To my amazement, it worked. Not in the way I expected. My physical body remained frozen on the bed, but I felt myself separate, creating a dream body I could control within the paralysis state. The shadowy figures seemed startled. They backed away as I moved toward them. "What are you?" I asked. They didn't answer, but their forms became clearer. They weren't human, not exactly. Their proportions were wrong. Too tall, limbs too long, faces slightly distorted. I explored the room, finding that while my physical surroundings were still visible, they were overlaid with something else, like two transparencies stacked together. My bedroom, but also somewhere else. A place with different rules. Over the next few months, I perfected my technique. Each time sleep paralysis struck, I would separate from my body and explore further into this strange overlapping dimension. I began mapping it mentally, noting landmarks and boundaries. The entities, that's what I called them, always watched, but kept their distance now. I wasn't afraid anymore, I was exploring. 3 months in, I met someone else, a middle-aged man named David who seemed as surprised to see me as I was to see him. "Another traveler," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "It's been years since I've seen someone new." David explained he was like me, a lucid dreamer who had discovered how to navigate sleep paralysis. But he'd been there for 7 years. 7 years? I asked. "How is that possible?" "Time works differently here," he said. "My body is in a hospital in Boston. Coma patient, they call me. But I'm not in a coma. I'm here." He introduced me to others. 12. People all together, all trapped between worlds. Some had been there for decades, their physical bodies aging in hospital beds while their minds roamed this in-between place. "We call it the overlap," a woman named Sasha told me. "It's a buffer, zone between dimensions. During sleep paralysis, your consciousness enters this space temporarily. But you're stuck here," I said. "We went too deep," David explained. "Explored too far. There's a boundary, cross it, and you can't find your way back to your body." They showed me their makeshift community, built from shared mental energy in a quiet corner of the overlap. They had created a sanctuary away from the entities. "What are they?" I asked. "Native inhabitants," Sasha said. "This is their world, and we're the intruders. They've always been able to peek into our world during sleep paralysis. That's why people see them. But they want more than just visiting." "Rights." David's expression darkened. "They want access. Permanent doorways between their world and ours." "Is that even possible?" I asked. "It's happening already," another man said. "The boundaries are thinning. Your mapping expeditions, they're watching you, learning the paths you take." I felt cold. "What do you mean?" "Every time you explore, you create a trail," David explained. "Like cutting a path through dense jungle, you're making it easier for them to find their way through." That night, when I returned to my body and finally broke free of the paralysis, I was shaking. I decided to stop my explorations, to fight, the paralysis conventionally instead of leaning into it. But 3 nights later, unable to sleep, I noticed something strange on my bedroom wall. A faint outline that hadn't been there before. A doorway-shaped shadow that seemed to deepen when I looked directly at it. The next night, the outline was more defined. I tried to stay awake, downing coffee and energy drinks. But eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep and immediately slipped into paralysis. This time was different. The entities weren't keeping their distance. They surrounded my bed, more substantial than ever before. And they were working on something. The shadow doorway on my wall, which was now visible in the overlap as a half-constructed portal. I separated from my body and rushed toward them. "Stop!" They turned as one, and for the first time, one of them spoke. "Cartographer," it said, its voice like rustling leaves. "Thank you for your service." I tried to disrupt their work, but my dream hands passed through the structure they were building. David appeared beside me. I felt the disturbance. They're breaking through, aren't they? "Help me stop them," I pleaded. "We can't stop them directly," he said. "But we can collapse the path." He looked at me sadly. "It means you can never return to the overlap. You'll have to block your sensitivity completely." "How?" "The same way we became trapped here, crossed the boundary." I didn't understand at first, but then it dawned on me. "You want me to trap myself here?" "Just briefly. We'll guide you back before you're stuck. But your crossing will destabilize the pathways you've created, like a bridge collapsing after too much weight." It was risky, but I agreed. David and the others led me to the boundary, a shimmering veil at the edge of the overlap. Beyond it, colors and shapes existed that my mind couldn't properly process. "Just step through, then immediately back," David instructed. "We'll hold on to you." I took a deep breath and stepped through. The sensation was indescribable, like being unmade and remade simultaneously. I felt the others pulling me back, their grip on my consciousness tenuous but present. As I stumbled back across the boundary, I felt the pathways I'd created collapse behind me. The entities shrieked in frustration as their partially constructed doorway crumbled. David and the others quickly guided me back to my body. "Go now," he urged, "and don't come back. They'll be watching for you specifically." I slipped back into my body and broke free of the paralysis with a gasp. The shadow doorway on my wall was gone. I haven't had sleep paralysis since that night. My lucid dreams have faded too, becoming ordinary, forgettable sleep. Sometimes I miss the control, the adventure of exploration. But sometimes, I notice people on the street who seem to move wrongly, whose proportions aren't quite right. They turn to watch me pass, their eyes following too long. And I wonder if some doorways, once opened, can ever truly be closed. The call came at 3:17 a.m., that liminal hour when the barrier between worlds feels thinnest. I was awake, of course. I'm always awake at that hour. "He's gone, Ellie." My sister's voice cracked over the line. "Dad's gone?" I didn't need to ask. How? We'd all seen the signs. The increasing paranoia, the obsessive research, the dark circles under his eyes that matched our own. Sleep had always been the enemy in the Blackwood family. "I'll catch the first flight," I said. 3 days later, I stood on the porch of our childhood home, a Victorian monstrosity perched on a hill overlooking the small Massachusetts town where generations of Blackwoods had lived and died. The house had always felt too large, too full of empty spaces and whispered histories. My brother Michael opened the door before I could knock. At 38, he looked a decade older, hair prematurely graying, eyes sunken with the familiar exhaustion we all carried. "Liz is upstairs," he said, embracing me briefly. Going through Dad's papers, I followed him through the foyer, past the family portraits that lined the staircase. Solemn faces spanning centuries, all sharing the same hollow-eyed gaze. Our ancestors had passed down more than just the family name. Elizabeth sat cross-legged on the floor of our father's study, surrounded by stacks of papers, leather-bound journals, and printouts. At 35, she was the middle child, the peacemaker, the one who'd stayed closest to home. She looked up as we entered, offering a tired smile. "He left everything organized," she said, gesturing to the labeled boxes around her. Almost like he knew. "Of course he knew," Michael said bitterly. "He planned it." None of us said what we were all thinking, that our father had finally chosen permanent darkness over the nightly terror of paralysis. The Blackwood curse, he'd called it. For as long as I could remember, sleep had been the enemy in our house. As children, we'd all experienced the same nocturnal horror, waking frozen, unable to move or cry out while shadowy figures loomed over our beds. Our father had suffered the same affliction, as had his father before him. Sleep paralysis, the doctors called it, a neurological glitch, a misfiring between REM sleep and wakefulness. Nothing to fear, but the doctors hadn't seen what we had seen in those frozen moments, hadn't felt the weight of ancient attention, the sense of being studied by something that existed just beyond normal perception. "He was getting close to something," Elizabeth said, handing me a journal. "The last few months he was obsessed with genealogical research. He kept saying he'd found the source." I opened the journal to a page marked with a red ribbon. My father's handwriting, once precise and methodical, had become frantic, words crowding together as if racing against time. March 15th, found records of Agnes Blackwood's trial in Salem archives. Not executed with the others. Why? References to a compact with Magistrate Thomas Putnam. What did she offer in exchange for her life? March 20th, Agnes's journal located in university archives. Mentions night terrors and visitations similar to our family's experiences. First documented case in our lineage. What happened to her? April 3rd. Putnam's private papers contain reference to the Blackwood observation. Formal study began 1693. Still active? Who's watching us? The last entry was dated just 2 days before his death. They've been studying us for centuries, not superstition, not mental illness, something in our blood and our brains. We see what others can't, and they want to know why. I've found the room, God help us all. What room? I asked, looking up. Elizabeth and Michael exchanged glances. We found something yesterday, Michael said. In the basement. The Blackwood house had been built in 1823, but parts of the foundation were older, stone walls that predated the structure above. As children, we'd been forbidden from exploring the basement alone, our father citing dangerous structural issues. Now I understood why. Michael led us down the narrow stairs, flashlight in hand. The main basement was familiar. Stone walls, dirt floor, the ancient furnace that had heated the house for generations. But he continued to the far corner, where a section of wall looked slightly different from the rest. We found this behind the old bookshelf, he said, pointing to a seam in the stonework. It's a door. The hidden room beyond was small, perhaps 10 feet square, with a low ceiling that forced Michael to stoop. But it was what the room contained that stole my breath. Walls lined with filing cabinets, shelves of leather-bound volumes, and a large table in the center covered with papers. It's all about us, Elizabeth said quietly. About our family going back centuries. I approached the nearest cabinet, pulling open a drawer labeled Blackwood Generation 8, Subject 3. Inside were meticulous records, medical charts, sleep studies, transcribed interviews, and photographs of a solemn-faced man I recognized as our great-grandfather. Each drawer contained similar records for different family members across generations. An entire cabinet was devoted to our father, another to the three of us. Childhood medical records, school reports, and detailed accounts of our sleep paralysis episodes, including information we'd never shared with anyone. Someone's been watching us our entire lives, Michael said, his voice tight with anger, recording everything. On the central table lay our father's recent research, printouts of historical documents, genealogical charts, and scientific papers on genetics and neurology. At the center was a document titled The Blackwood Protocol, 1693 to present. The document began with a transcription of the original agreement between Agnes Blackwood and Magistrate Thomas Putnam, dated September 1693. whereas Agnes Blackwood stands accused of consorting with dark powers and unnatural communion with entities beyond mortal ken. She shall be spared the punishment of death in exchange for her family's participation in continued observation and study of the unique properties of Blackwood blood and consciousness. This compact shall extend to all her descendants in perpetuity. The Blackwood line demonstrates unusual neural activity during sleep states, allowing perception of what may be termed liminal entities existing at the threshold of human awareness. This ability appears heritable and may provide valuable insights into the nature of consciousness and reality itself. The Society for Empirical Metaphysics shall maintain continuous observation of all Blackwood descendants, documenting their experiences for the advancement of knowledge. Attached was a modern genetic analysis identifying what was described as the Blackwood variant, a mutation on chromosome 7 affecting neurotransmitter regulation during REM sleep. "They've been breeding us like lab rats," Michael said, disgust evident in his voice, "tracking the mutation through generations." "But who is they?" I asked. "This Society for Empirical Metaphysics, do they still exist?" Elizabeth handed me another folder. According to Dad's research, they evolved into something called the Threshold Institute in the 1920s. They're still active, with facilities in Massachusetts, Switzerland, and Japan. The folder contained photographs of a modern research facility, staff directories, and financial records showing an organization with considerable resources. Among the staff photos, I recognized several faces: our family doctor, my college advisor, even Michael's former therapist. "They've been placing people in our lives," I whispered, "monitoring us up close." "It gets worse," Elizabeth said, opening a leather-bound volume. "This is Agnes's original journal. Dad found it last month. The journal was written in a spidery hand, the English archaic but decipherable. Agnes described her night visitations in vivid detail, the paralysis, the sensing of presences, and most disturbingly, the visions that came during these episodes. May 4th, 1693. Again, the freezing came upon me in the night. I could not move nor cry out as the shadows gathered. They showed me the town meeting house consumed by flames. 3 days hence, it burned exactly as I had seen. June 17th, 1693. The visitation brought visions of blood in the miller's stream and children taken with fever. Within a fortnight, 5 children perished of the bloody flux, just as was shown too. Immediate entry after entry documented similar experiences. Visions during paralysis episodes that later came to pass. She was seeing the future, Michael said. That's why they didn't execute her. They realized her witchcraft was something else entirely. I thought of my own paralysis episodes, the terrifying visions that accompanied them, which I'd always dismissed as nightmares. Images of floods, fires, accidents. How many had later occurred exactly as I'd seen them? Dad believed the paralysis is just a side effect. Elizabeth continued. The mutation doesn't cause the paralysis. It allows us to perceive things others can't. The paralysis happens because our bodies are trying to protect us from fully engaging with whatever dimension these visions come from. So we're what? Psychics? I asked, trying to keep the skepticism from my voice. More like receivers, Michael said. Dad thought our brains operate at a frequency that can pick up echoes from possible futures. The entities we see during paralysis are some kind of intermediaries. They're showing us these things for a reason. I remembered the shadowy figures from my childhood episodes, tall, featureless forms that seemed to be observing me as much as I observed them. Not threatening exactly, but intensely interested. Why would Dad kill himself if he was finally understanding what was happening to us? I asked. Elizabeth and Michael exchanged another look. There's one more thing, Elizabeth said quietly. She handed me a final journal, not our father's, but a newer one I didn't recognize. This is Dr. Eliza Chambers' research diary. She was Dad's contact at the Threshold Institute, someone he thought he could trust. He stole this from her office. During his last visit, the journal detailed the Institute's current research focus, using predictive algorithms to analyze patterns in Blackwood visions across generations, identifying which futures were most likely to manifest. The final pages contained something more disturbing: plans for a new phase of the Blackwood study. The passive observation protocol has yielded significant data, but the board has approved moving to phase 2. Controlled amplification of the Blackwood variant through targeted neurochemical intervention will begin next month. Subjects will be monitored for increased frequency and clarity of predictive episodes. Primary targets for initial trials: Elizabeth Blackwood, most consistent reporting; Michael Blackwood, strongest genetic expression; Eleanor Blackwood, unique pattern recognition abilities. Note: Robert Blackwood's increasing awareness of the program presents a security concern. Surveillance has been increased. Contingency measures prepared if necessary. A cold weight settled in my stomach. They were planning to experiment on us, and Dad found out. They didn't just plan it, Michael said grimly. They've already started. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a small puncture mark in the crook of his arm. I had a routine physical last month. The doctor insisted on a new type of vitamin injection. My paralysis episodes have tripled since then. Elizabeth nodded. Same here. My therapist prescribed a new sleep medication that was supposed to help with the paralysis. Instead, the episodes are more intense, more vivid. I thought of my own recent physical, the unusual blood tests, the vitamin supplements my doctor had insisted would help with my chronic fatigue. Dad didn't commit suicide, Elizabeth said quietly. The autopsy showed a massive stroke, but he'd written to me the day before saying he needed to show us what he'd found. He was planning to expose them. You think they killed him? I said, the reality sinking in. I think he got too close to the truth, she replied. And they couldn't risk him warning us. We spent the night going through the hidden room's contents, trying to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and terrifying. The Blackwood mutation had been studied for over 3 centuries, with each generation carefully monitored. What had begun as superstitious fear of witchcraft had evolved into sophisticated scientific research on genetic precognition. The Society, later the Institute, believed that our paralysis episodes were moments when our consciousness partially separated from normal space-time, allowing us to glimpse potential futures. The shadowy entities we perceived were theorized to be either manifestations of our own consciousness or actual beings that existed in this liminal state. Most disturbing was the realization that we'd never been alone. Not really. Our entire lives had been observed, documented, analyzed. The people we trusted most had been placed there to watch us. So what do we do now? I asked as dawn broke, casting long shadows across the basement room. We have 3 options, Michael said, practical as always. Run, hide, or fight. They'd find us if we ran, Elizabeth said. They've been tracking our family for centuries. And hiding means living in fear, I added. I've had enough of that. So we fight, Michael concluded. But how do you fight an organization that's been operating in secret for hundreds of years? The answer came to me slowly, a plan forming as I looked around at the accumulated knowledge of generations of Blackwoods. We use what makes them want us in the first place, I said. Our curse is also our weapon. That night, for the first time in my life, I didn't fight the paralysis when it came. Instead, I welcomed it, surrendering to the frozen state as the familiar shadows gathered around my bed. The entities appeared as they always had, tall, featureless forms that seemed to study me with an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. But this time I tried to communicate, focusing my thoughts directly at them. Show me the Institute. Show me what they plan. The vision came in fragments. A sterile laboratory, subjects strapped to beds, brain activity displayed on monitors. I saw myself, Michael, and Elizabeth among them. Then something else. A catastrophic failure, alarms blaring, reality itself seeming to fracture around the facility. When I broke free of the paralysis, I wrote everything down, then went to find my siblings. They'd had similar experiences, directed, visions showing different aspects of the same future. Over the next week, we developed our plan. Using our father's research and our own growing understanding of our abilities, we began actively cultivating the paralysis state, directing our visions towards specific questions about the Institute and its vulnerabilities. The entities, whatever they were, seemed to respond to our intentional queries, showing us increasingly detailed glimpses of possible futures. We documented everything, creating our own archive of visions and predictions. We learned that the Institute had a central database containing all Blackwood records, including information on other families with similar genetic mutations. We saw the security systems, the research protocols, even the emergency containment procedures. Most importantly, we saw the consequences of their Phase 2 experiments, the dangerous destabilization of the boundary between normal consciousness and the liminal state our mutation allowed us to access. They're going to tear open something that should stay closed, Elizabeth said after one particularly disturbing vision. They don't understand what they're dealing with. Then we need to stop them before they start, I replied. We made our move 3 weeks after our father's funeral. Using information gleaned from our visions, we located the Institute's New England Research Facility, a nondescript building on the outskirts of Boston, disguised as a private neurological clinic. What happened next would later be described in news reports as a sophisticated cyber attack that exposed decades of unethical human experimentation. In reality, it was simpler than that. We didn't hack their system so much as we walked right through their front door, using security codes and protocols we'd seen in our visions. The evidence we gathered was damning: records of unauthorized medical procedures, illegal surveillance, and coerced participation in experiments dating back generations. We sent everything to journalists, law enforcement agencies, and human rights organizations worldwide. The Institute's attempts to discredit us failed when other families came forward, other bloodlines they'd been monitoring and manipulating for generations, all carrying variations of the same genetic mutation. The scandal led to arrests, investigations, and eventually, the dismantling of the Threshold Institute's research network. Their records were seized, their facilities shut down, but that wasn't the end of our story. It was, in many ways, just the beginning. Free from external manipulation, we began to explore our abilities on our own terms. We discovered that the paralysis episodes became less frightening, more controllable with practice. The entities, which we came to see as neither malevolent nor benevolent, but simply different, continued to appear, continued to show us glimpses of possible futures. We formed a network with other affected families, sharing knowledge and techniques for managing our unique perception. Some used their abilities to prevent accidents or disasters they foresaw. Others focused on understanding the scientific implications of what we could do. As for the Blackwood siblings, we kept our father's research, but destroyed the hidden room itself, breaking the physical link to centuries of exploitation. The house remains in our family, no longer a place of fear, but a headquarters for our continuing exploration. I still experience sleep paralysis almost nightly, but now, when the familiar weight settles on my chest and the shadows gather around my bed, I don't fight it. I don't fear it. Instead, I listen to what they've come to show me, these messengers from the spaces between what is and what might be. Our family curse turned out to be something else entirely, not a burden to bear, but a window into possibilities others can't perceive, not a punishment for some ancient sin, but a responsibility to use what we see wisely. And sometimes in that frozen state between sleeping and waking, I sense my father's presence among the shadowy figures, watching over us, finally understanding the true nature of the Blackwood legacy, a legacy that isn't ending with us but transforming. My daughter is 5 now, and last week she told me about the tall shadows that visit her room at night. I held her close and promised to teach her everything I've learned about our family's unusual gift. After all, some curses, when fully embraced, reveal themselves to be something else entirely, a different kind of sight, a different way of moving through the world, a different kind of inheritance. I found my mother's journals 3 days after her funeral. Hidden in a locked drawer of her bedside table, 13 leather-bound books spanning 20 years of her life. I should have waited, should have given myself time to process her suicide before diving into her private thoughts. But grief makes you do desperate things. The first entry was dated 2 weeks after my birth. It found me again last night, standing at the foot of my bed watching with those hollow eyes. David thinks it's just postpartum depression, but he doesn't see what I see. Doesn't feel its weight on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs while I lie there, unable to move, unable to scream. It's been following me since I was a teenager, but now it's different. Now it looks at the baby's room. Now it has a purpose. I read until dawn, my hands shaking as I turned pages filled with my mother's increasingly frantic handwriting. 20 years of torment, documented in painful detail. Sleep paralysis, her doctors had called it. A neurological phenomenon, nothing to worry about. But my mother knew better. The thing that visited her wasn't a hallucination. It was real, and it was watching, waiting. The last entry was dated the night before she died. It's almost time. I see it in its eyes now, the same emptiness I feel spreading inside me. 30 years it's been with me, aging as I age, feeding on my fear. I know what happened to my mother now and her mother before her. I know why they all ended the same way. I'm sorry, Ellie. I tried to break the cycle. I tried to be stronger than they were. But it's too strong and I'm so tired. Maybe if you know the truth, you'll find a way. Look in the attic, the box with the red string. Everything started there. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. My mother had never mentioned sleep paralysis to me, never talked about the thing that haunted her nights. She'd kept her torment hidden behind a perfect mask of normalcy, just as her mother had before her. That night I slept in my mother's house for the first time since her death. I'd meant to check the attic, to find the box she'd mentioned, but exhaustion pulled me under before I could muster the energy. I woke at 3:17 a.m., the same time mentioned repeatedly in my mother's journals. Woke to a crushing weight on my chest and the absolute certainty that I wasn't alone. It stood at the foot of the bed, a figure darker than the surrounding darkness. Tall and thin, with elongated limbs and a face that wasn't quite a face. More, an impression of features constantly shifting. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only lie there paralyzed as it watched me with eyes that weren't eyes but somehow still saw everything. This was what my mother had experienced, what had driven her to end her life rather than face one more night of this terror. When morning finally came and the paralysis lifted, I went straight to the attic. The box with the red string was tucked behind old Christmas decorations, a small wooden chest, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Inside were newspaper clippings from 1932, yellowed with age. They detailed an archaeological dig at a Native American burial site, led by my great-grandfather, Professor Thomas Harlow. The expedition had recovered significant artifacts of cultural and historical value, now housed in various museums. Beneath the clippings was a small leather pouch, closed with the same red string that had been around the box. My hands trembled as I opened it, spilling its contents onto the dusty attic floor. 3 small objects rolled out: a carved stone bead, a copper pendant in the shape of a bird, and a yellowed human tooth with a hole drilled through it. Souvenirs my great-grandfather had kept for himself, perhaps. Stolen pieces of someone else's history. There was a letter, too, written in my grandmother's handwriting, to my daughter and her daughter after her. By the time you read this, I will likely be gone the same way my mother went, the same way you will go if you don't find a way to break the cycle. It began with my father and what he took from the burial grounds. He didn't believe in curses or spirits, but he believed in power. The artifacts he kept were sacred objects, meant to guide the dead to their rest. By taking them, he disturbed something ancient and vengeful. It came for him first, in his sleep. Then when he died, it came for my mother, and when she was gone, it found me. It will find you too, and eventually your daughter. It ages with us, feeds on our fear, grows stronger as we grow weaker. until the weight of it becomes too much to bear. I've tried to return the artifacts, but without knowing exactly where they came from, my efforts have failed. Perhaps you will succeed where I could not. I'm sorry for the burden I'm passing to you. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to end it. With all my love, Mother, I sat among the dust and forgotten things, holding physical proof of a generational curse. My great-grandfather's arrogance, my grandmother's despair, my mother's suffering, and now mine. That night it came again, and the next, and the next. Each time I lay paralyzed as it watched me with those empty eyes. Each time I noticed something new. The slight stoop of its shoulders, the wispy hair-like tendrils that floated around its head, the way its joints seemed swollen and painful. It was old, I realized. As old as I was. 32 years of existence, mirroring my own lifespan, just as it had mirrored my mother's. I began researching obsessively. The archaeological dig had taken place near the Seneca Nation territories in western New York. The artifacts my great-grandfather had stolen were likely Haudenosaunee, people of the Longhouse, more commonly known as Iroquois. I took a leave of absence from work and drove to the reservation, the wooden box secure in my passenger seat. I didn't know if anyone there could help me, or if they'd even want to after what my family had done, but I had to try. The Tribal Historic Preservation Office was housed in a modern building near the community center. I sat in the parking lot for an hour before finding the courage to go inside, clutching the box like a lifeline. The woman at the front desk looked up as I entered, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp and assessing. "I need to speak with someone about returning some artifacts," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They were taken from a burial site in the 1930s by my great-grandfather." Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded and picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Daniel Talchief, the tribe's cultural preservation officer. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the box. I nodded, pushing it across the desk. He opened it carefully, examining each item with reverent hands. "These are funerary objects," he said finally. "They would have been buried with someone important, a spiritual leader perhaps. The bead is serpentine, representing wisdom. The copper bird symbolizes the journey between worlds, and this," he held up the tooth, "would have belonged to the deceased, a physical connection to their spirit." "My family took them," I said, shame burning in my throat. "And something followed us home." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "Tell me." So I did. I told him about my mother's journals, my grandmother's letter, the thing that visited me in the night. I told him about the paralysis, the weight on my chest, the eyes that weren't eyes. I told him about the suicides. 3 generations of women in my family, all ending their lives the same way. When I finished, the office was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. "We have stories," Daniel said finally, "about spirits that attach themselves to stolen objects, guardians that follow the sacred items trying to bring them home. But over time, without proper ceremonies to guide them, these guardians can become corrupted, angry, hungry. Can it be stopped?" I asked, hope and desperation tangling in my chest. "Perhaps." He gathered the artifacts and placed them back in the box. "These need to be returned to where they were taken from with the proper ceremonies and offerings. It won't be easy. Records from that time are incomplete, and many burial sites were destroyed or relocated." "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. "Please." Daniel studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll help you, but not for your sake. For the sake of the spirit that's been twisted by your family's actions, for the ancestors whose rest was disturbed." It took 3 weeks of research to identify the likely location of the original burial site, now private property, a farm owned by the same family for generations. Daniel negotiated with the owners while I stayed in a nearby motel, each night, bringing another visit from my aging shadow. It was growing more aggressive, as if it sensed what I was trying to do. The paralysis lasted longer. The weight on my chest grew heavier. Twice I woke with bruises over my heart, perfect impressions of long, thin fingers. "We have permission," Daniel told me on the 23rd day. "Tomorrow night, during the dark moon." The family knows the history of their land. They've found artifacts themselves over the years. That night was the worst yet. The entity didn't just stand and watch. It climbed onto the bed, its weight crushing me into the mattress. Its face lowered to mine, so close I could feel the cold emptiness of it against my skin. "You cannot escape," it whispered the first time it had ever spoken. Its voice was like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Your mother couldn't. Her mother couldn't. You are mine until the end." When morning came, I had 5 deep scratches across my chest, directly over my heart. The burial site was in a small grove of trees at the edge of a cornfield. We arrived at sunset, Daniel bringing 2 elders from the tribe who carried drums and bundles of herbs. The farmer and his wife met us at the property line, solemn-faced but welcoming. "My grandfather used to talk about the dig that happened here," the farmer said as he led us through the field. "Said it was a desecration. Said the men who did it would pay a price." I thought of my great-grandfather, who died in an asylum, convinced something was watching him from the shadows. Of my grandmother and mother, both driven to suicide by the same relentless entity. Of the scratches on my own chest, still burning beneath my shirt. The ceremony began at nightfall. The elders sang in a language I didn't understand, their voices rising and falling like water. Daniel translated parts for me. Prayers for forgiveness, for peace, for the restoration of what had been broken. I placed the artifacts in the small hole we dug, adding a lock of my hair and 3 drops of my blood, connecting my lineage to the act of return. "Speak to it," Daniel instructed as the singing continued. "Tell it that its duty is fulfilled, that it can rest now." I closed my eyes, picturing the entity that had haunted 3 generations of my family. "Your duty is done," I whispered. "The sacred objects are returned. You can rest now. We can both rest." The ceremony continued until midnight. When it was over, the hole was filled, the ground blessed with tobacco and sweet grass. I felt lighter somehow, though nothing dramatic had happened. No visions, no sudden wind. Just the quiet night and the stars above us. "Will it work?" I asked Daniel as we walked back to our cars. "That depends on many things," he said. "On whether this was truly the right place. On whether the spirit accepts our offerings. On whether 3 generations of anger can be healed with 1 night of ceremony." He looked at me with those penetrating eyes. "And on whether you believe it will work." I returned to my mother's house, my house now, and prepared for bed with a mixture of hope and dread. Would it come again? Or had we truly set it free? I woke at 3:17 a.m., my body tense, waiting for the familiar weight on my chest. But there was nothing, just the quiet darkness of the room and my own breathing. For a moment I felt a surge of relief. Then I saw it, standing not at the foot of the bed but by the window, looking out not at me. It turned slowly and I gasped. Its face had changed. The shifting, featureless void had solidified into something almost human, an old woman's face lined with age and sorrow. Her eyes, once empty pits, now held a spark of recognition. I wasn't paralyzed this time. I could move, could sit up, in bed and face her directly. "Are you free now?" I whispered. She didn't speak but inclined her head slightly. Then she raised one elongated hand and pointed, not at me, but at my stomach. Understanding bloomed, cold and terrible. I wasn't pregnant, not yet, but someday if I had a daughter. The entity faded gradually like mist in morning sun, leaving me alone with the terrible knowledge that I hadn't broken the curse at all. I'd only interrupted it. The next day, I called Daniel. "She's still here," I said when he answered. "Different, but still here. And she showed me it's not over." His sigh carried the weight of centuries. Some bonds can't be broken with just one ceremony. Some wounds take generations to heal, just as they took generations to create. So what do? Never have children? End my family line? Or continue the work you've started, he said. Learn our ways. Help return other stolen artifacts. Make amends not just for your family, but for all the others who took what wasn't theirs. That was 5 years ago. I've spent those years working with Daniel and his people, tracking down artifacts from that original dig and others like it, helping return them to their rightful places. I've learned the ceremonies, the songs, the proper ways to show respect to the ancestors and the land. The entity, I know her name now, though I won't write it here, still visits occasionally, not every night, not with the crushing weight and paralyzing terror of before. She watches, sometimes from the corner of my bedroom, sometimes from my dreams, waiting. I'm pregnant now. The test confirmed it last week. I don't know if it's a girl or boy yet, but I find myself hoping for a son, not because I would love a daughter less, but because I fear for her more. Daniel says the work we're doing is changing the entity, healing the corruption that twisted it from guardian to tormentor. He believes that by the time my child is grown, the curse might truly be broken. I want to believe him. But at night, when I wake to find her standing in the corner, her ancient eyes fixed on my growing belly, I wonder if some debts can ever truly be paid. I've started my own journal. Like my mother and grandmother before me, I'm leaving a record for my child. But unlike them, I'm not just documenting the haunting, I'm documenting the healing, the ceremonies, the returns, the slow, painful work of making amends. If I have a daughter, she will know everything from the beginning. She will understand the weight of our family's actions and the path toward redemption. She will never face the entity alone, in confusion and terror, as I did, as my mother did. And maybe, just maybe, she will be the one to finally break the cycle that began with a stolen tooth and a guardian spirit twisted by grief and rage. Until then, I continue the work. I prepare for my child, and when I wake at 3:17 a.m. to find those ancient eyes watching me from the shadows, I no longer turn away in fear. I'm trying, I tell her. I'm trying to make it right. Sometimes I think I see her nod. I haven't truly slept in 7 years, not since my 3rd tour in Afghanistan. The doctors call it chronic insomnia with hypervigilance, a fancy way of saying my brain refuses to shut down. 4 hours of broken sleep is a good night. Most nights are spent staring at the ceiling, listening for threats that aren't there. The sleep paralysis started about 2 years after I got back. Not often at first. Maybe once a month I'd wake up completely frozen, unable to move, while shadow figures lurked in the corners of my room. The episodes became more frequent over time, another unwelcome souvenir from the war. When I saw the flyer for the clinical trial, I was desperate enough to try anything. The Morpheus Protocol, they called it. A new neurological treatment for treatment-resistant insomnia. The compensation was good too, which mattered since I hadn't held a steady job in years. During the screening interview, Dr. Whitaker asked about other sleep disorders. I lied when she asked about sleep paralysis. The study specifically excluded participants with parasomnia disorders, and I needed that money, and maybe, if I was lucky, a few nights of actual rest. The treatment combines targeted electrical stimulation with a new class of sleep medications. Dr. Whitaker explained after I was accepted. It helps reset the brain's sleep architecture. The research facility was impressive, all gleaming white surfaces and soft blue lighting. They hooked me up to machines that monitored everything from my brain waves to my eye movements. The electrode cap felt strange against my scalp, but the technicians assured me it was necessary to target the right brain regions. The medication will help you fall asleep, the technician said, injecting something into my IV line. The stimulation begins once you enter stage 2 sleep. I remember the ceiling tiles blurring as the drugs took hold. For the first time in years, I felt myself sliding effortlessly into darkness. I slept for 14 hours straight. No nightmares, no waking up in a cold sweat. Just peaceful, perfect blackness. When I finally opened my eyes, Dr. Whitaker was smiling down at me. "How do you feel, Mr. Hayes?" Amazing, I said, and I meant it. I felt rested, truly rested for the first time in years. Your brainwave patterns are exactly what we hoped to see, she said, showing me a tablet with multicolored lines I didn't understand. We'd like to keep you for observation today, then try one more session tonight. I noticed something odd about the room's lighting. The fluorescence seemed to have a slight greenish tint that hadn't been there before. I blinked hard, and the color normalized. Just my eyes adjusting, I thought. The second night of treatment went even better than the first. I slept deeply and woke feeling like I could run a marathon. Dr. Whitaker was ecstatic with the results. We'll discharge you today, but I want you to keep a sleep diary and come back in 3 days for follow-up testing. As I was leaving the facility, I noticed more color discrepancies. The sky seemed too purple, the grass too yellow, and there was something off about the people I passed on the street. Their movements were slightly wrong, like actors who hadn't quite mastered human behavior. At home, I tried to shake the feeling of wrongness. I called my sister, Julie. "How did the study go?" she asked. "Good, I think. I actually slept." "That's great. Mom and I were worried about you." Something in her voice sounded strange. The cadence was off, the words too carefully chosen. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I let it go, but the feeling persisted. That night, I slept without medication for the first time since the treatment. Again, perfect, dreamless sleep. By the third day, the wrongness had become impossible to ignore. Colors continued to shift subtly when I wasn't looking directly at them. People moved as if they were slightly out of sync with the world. And sometimes, just at the edge of my hearing, I could detect a faint electrical hum. At my follow-up appointment, I tried to explain these symptoms to Dr. Whitaker. "Some sensory recalibration is expected," she said dismissively. "Your brain is adjusting to normal sleep patterns after years of deprivation." But as she spoke, I noticed something terrifying. For a split second, her face seemed to glitch, revealing something else underneath, something that wasn't human. I left the appointment early, making an excuse about feeling unwell. At home, I pulled out my laptop and searched for information about the Morpheus protocol. There was almost nothing, just a brief mention in a scientific journal about consciousness stabilization during parasomnia events. Parasomnia, sleep paralysis. I called Julie again. "Hey, can you do me a favor? It's going to sound weird." "Sure, what's up?" "Go to my apartment. I think I left the stove on." There was a pause. "But you're at your apartment now, aren't you? Just humor me, please." Another pause. "Okay, I'll head over in about an hour." I hung up and immediately tried another experiment. I pinched myself hard on the arm. I felt it, but the pain was dull, distant, like it was happening to someone else. I tried to remember the last time I'd eaten. I couldn't. The last time I'd used the bathroom. I couldn't remember that either. A horrible suspicion began forming. In my mind, I went to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My face looked normal, but when I leaned closer, my eyes seemed wrong. The pupils didn't dilate correctly in the light. "I'm not awake," I whispered to my reflection. The words hung in the air, and suddenly the bathroom lights flickered. For just a moment, I saw myself as I truly was, lying on a bed in the research facility, eyes closed, electrodes still attached to my head. I was still there. I had never left. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The Morpheus protocol hadn't cured my sleep paralysis, it had weaponized it. They had trapped me in a perpetual paralysis state, but one where my mind had constructed a convincing reality. I was experiencing the most sophisticated form of sleep paralysis possible, one where I believed I was awake and going about my life. The doorbell rang, startling me. Julie stood outside looking concerned. "You sounded weird on the phone," she said. I stared at her, seeing my sister but knowing this wasn't really her, just a construction of my paralyzed mind. "I need to wake up," I said. She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You are awake." "No, I'm still at the research facility. This isn't real." Her expression changed, becoming unnaturally blank. "You're confused, Michael. The treatment was successful. You're better now." Her voice had that electrical hum underneath it. I pushed past her and ran outside. The world seemed less stable now, colors shifting more dramatically, buildings slightly distorted. In the distance, I could see the research facility. That's where my real body is, I thought. I began running toward it. Around me, people stopped to stare, their movements becoming increasingly mechanical. The sky darkened unnaturally fast, and the electrical humming grew louder. "Subject is resisting," I heard someone say, though there was no one near me. I reached the facility and burst through the doors. Inside, everything was wrong. Corridors that stretched impossibly long, rooms that couldn't exist in the buildings, actual footprint. "Mr. Hayes." Dr. Whitaker appeared before me, her form flickering between human and something else. "You need to calm down." "Let me wake up," I demanded. "You don't understand what we've accomplished," she said. "Your mind has been trapped in a perpetual paralysis state, but one where you have agency. You're experiencing a controlled hallucination, a complete reality of our design. Why would you do this? Sleep paralysis creates a unique state, a consciousness that exists between worlds. We've stabilized that state and given it structure. You're our first success." I lunged at her, but my hands passed through her form. "That won't work," she said. "Remember, none of this is physical." I tried to think. If this was all happening in my mind, then maybe I could use that. In regular sleep paralysis, I sometimes broke free by focusing intensely on moving a single finger or toe. I closed my eyes and concentrated on my real body, lying somewhere in this building. I focused on my right index finger, imagining it moving, twitching. The world around me shuddered. The humming became a shriek. "Stop him!" Dr. Whitaker's voice distorted. I pushed harder, focusing everything on that single finger movement. The constructed reality began breaking apart around me, colors smearing, sounds distorting. And then suddenly I felt it, the weight of my actual body, the stiffness in my limbs from lying motionless for days. My right index finger twitched. My eyes opened to blinding fluorescent lights. I was lying on a bed surrounded by medical equipment. I couldn't move anything except that finger, but I kept twitching it over and over. A real nurse, not the construct, from my hallucination, noticed the movement and called for a doctor. "He's emerging," she said with alarm. The real Dr. Whitaker appeared, looking nothing like her counterpart in my hallucination. "This isn't possible. He shouldn't be able to break the paralysis state." I kept moving my finger, gradually regaining sensation in my hand, then my arm. "Sedate him," Whitaker ordered, but it was too late. I had control of my right arm now and yanked the IV from my left arm before they could inject more drugs. What followed is still a blur. I remember alarms, shouting, security being called. Somehow I managed to get out of the bed and stumble from the room. My legs barely worked after days of immobility, but adrenaline kept me moving. I made it to a fire alarm and pulled it, creating enough chaos to slip out a side exit. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this from a motel room 3 states away. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since escaping, afraid of what might happen if I do. My body is weak from the ordeal, and I know I can't keep going like this. I've sent copies of this account to several journalists and my actual sister. I don't know if anyone will believe me. It sounds delusional even to my own ears. But sometimes, when I'm on the edge of exhaustion and my eyes start to close, I hear that electrical humming again, and I wonder if I ever truly escaped, or if this is just another layer of the hallucination, another reality they've constructed to make me think I'm free. The only way to know for sure would be to sleep. And that's the one thing I can never do again. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural before college. I was always the rational one in my friend group, the person who could explain away the strange noises in old buildings or the weird shadows in photographs. But what happened to me during my junior year at Westlake University changed everything I thought I knew about reality. It started about 2 weeks after I moved into my off-campus apartment. Nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old converted house from the 1920s. The rent was cheap, which was perfect for a broke college student like me. and it was within walking distance to campus. The landlord, Mrs. Winters, was this sweet elderly lady who seemed almost too eager to rent the place out. The first few nights were uneventful. I was settling into my new routine, focusing on my psychology classes, and enjoying the independence of living alone for the first time. Then came that first night when everything changed. I remember waking up suddenly at exactly 3:17 a.m. I know the time because my eyes immediately went to the glowing red numbers on my bedside clock. I couldn't move, not a single muscle. It felt like someone had placed a heavy weighted blanket over my entire body, but there was nothing there. My breath was shallow, my heart racing, but I couldn't even lift a finger. And that's when I saw it for the first time. A dark figure standing in the far corner of my bedroom. It was just a silhouette, really. A shadow darker than the darkness around it. Human-shaped, but somehow wrong, like the proportions were slightly off. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't work. I could only lie there paralyzed, watching as this thing stood motionless across the room. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I finally managed to move my fingers, then my hand, and suddenly the paralysis broke. I sat up, gasping, flicked on my bedside lamp, and of course, nothing was there. The next morning, I did what any reasonable person would do. I Googled what had happened. Sleep paralysis, the search results told me. A perfectly normal, if terrifying, sleep disorder where your mind wakes up before your body does. The hallucinations are just your brain trying to make sense of being conscious while still in a dreamlike state. That made sense. I'd been stressed about classes, adjusting to a new place. Mystery solved, I thought. But the next night, it happened. Again. Same time, 3:17 a.m. Same paralysis. Same dark figure in the corner. Except this time, it wasn't just standing there. It had moved closer, now about halfway between the corner and my bed. I told myself it was just my brain playing tricks, that I was anticipating it now, so my hallucination was getting more detailed. That's all it was. But why did it feel so real? Why could I feel the temperature drop when it appeared? Why did the air seem to get thicker, harder to breathe? This pattern continued for a week. Each night the figure would appear, and each night it would be closer to my bed than the night before. By the seventh night, it was standing right at the foot of my bed, a towering shadow that seemed to absorb what little light came through my window. I started taking precautions. I left lights on when I went to sleep. I tried sleeping on the couch instead. I even asked my friend Emma to stay over one night. Nothing helped. The figure still appeared, always at 3:17 a.m., always a little closer than before. Then things got worse. I started noticing things during the day. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. My coffee mug wasn't where I'd left it. Books rearranged on my shelf. The shower curtain closed when I was sure I'd left it open. You're just stressed and not paying attention, I told myself. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. The first piece of evidence I couldn't ignore appeared about 2 weeks into these episodes. I woke up one morning to find an indentation on the other side of my bed, as if someone had been sitting there watching me sleep. It wasn't just a rumpled blanket or bunched up sheets. It was the distinct impression of someone having sat there for a long time, the weight of them pressing down into my mattress. I ran my hand over it, feeling the coolness of the depression. No one had been in my apartment. The doors were locked, windows closed. I had no explanation. That same day, I noticed a strange smell in my bathroom. It was subtle at first, like old cologne or aftershave, but with a musty undertone that reminded me of my grandfather's closet after he passed away. The smell would come and go throughout the day, strongest near the bathroom mirror. I tried cleaning everything, scrubbing every surface, burning candles, opening windows. Nothing got rid of it. And weirdly, no one else could smell it. When Emma came over to study, I asked if she noticed any strange smells in the bathroom. "Smells like your usual cheap soap to me," she said with a shrug. By the third week, I was a mess. I wasn't sleeping more than a couple hours a night. My grades were slipping. Dark circles had formed under my eyes, and people were starting to notice. "You look like hell," my roommate from freshman year, Tyler, told me when we met for coffee. "What's going on?" I almost told him everything then, but stopped myself. How crazy would I sound? "Oh, just a shadow person visiting me every night and slowly getting closer to my bed. Also, I think it's hanging around during the day too." Yeah, that would go over well. Instead, I just mumbled something about insomnia and stress. That night, something new happened. The figure appeared as usual at 3:17 a.m., now standing right beside my bed, looming over me. But this time, I felt something. Cold brush against my arm, like icy fingers trailing across my skin. The touch broke my paralysis immediately, and I scrambled out of bed, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, huddled under a blanket, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. The next day, I decided to do some research on my apartment building. If this was more than sleep paralysis, if this was some kind of haunting, then maybe there was a history I should know about. I started at the university library, digging through old local newspapers on microfilm. It took hours of searching before I found anything useful, but when I did, my blood ran cold. An article from 1987 detailed the mysterious death of a graduate student named Daniel Mercer, who had been found dead in his apartment, my apartment, with no signs of trauma or illness. The medical examiner had ruled it a case of sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome, a rare condition where people simply die in their sleep for no apparent reason. But what caught my attention was a quote from Daniel's roommate. He'd been complaining about sleep problems for weeks. Said he kept waking up paralyzed, seeing someone in the room with him. We thought he was just stressed about his thesis. My hands were shaking as I read those words. Daniel had experienced the same thing I was going through, in the same apartment, and it had somehow killed him. I kept digging and found Daniel's thesis in the university archives. He'd been studying sleep disorders, specifically sleep paralysis, across different cultures. His thesis proposed that what people experienced during sleep paralysis wasn't just hallucination, but potentially something real, something that existed in what he called the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. That night, I didn't even try to sleep in my bed. I set up a makeshift recording studio in my living room. My phone propped up to record video, my laptop recording audio, and a small digital voice recorder I'd borrowed from the journalism department, placed on the coffee table. I didn't expect to sleep at all, but exhaustion eventually won out. I woke up at, you guessed it, 3:17 a.m., completely paralyzed on my couch. The figure was there, standing in the doorway between my living room and kitchen. It stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, turned its head toward my recording devices. The paralysis lasted longer than usual that night. When I could finally move again, I immediately grabbed my phone to check the recording. The video showed nothing unusual, just me sleeping on the couch. The laptop audio was similarly uneventful, but the digital voice recorder, that was different. Most of the recording was just the ambient sounds of my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, occasional creaks from the building settling, my own breathing. But at exactly 3:17 a.m. there was something else. A whisper, so faint I had to turn the volume all the way up and use headphones to hear it clearly. "Daniel," the voice whispered. "Daniel, I'm still here." My name isn't Daniel. I played it again and again, trying to convince myself it was just static or some audio artifact. But it was clear as day. A voice, whispering the name of a man who had died in my apartment decades ago. The next day I went straight to Mrs. Winters, my landlord. I needed to know if she knew anything about Daniel Mercer or the history of my apartment. She invited me in for tea, her hands shaking slightly as she poured. "I was wondering when you'd come asking," she said quietly. "Most tenants in that apartment do eventually." Mrs. Winters had been the property manager back in the 80s when Daniel died. She told me that after his death, the apartment had developed a reputation. Tenants rarely stayed more than a few months. They all reported similar experiences: sleep paralysis, the feeling of being watched, objects moving on their own. Daniel was obsessed with his research, she explained. He believed that sleep paralysis was a window to another plane of existence, that the figures people saw were real beings trying to cross over. In the weeks before he died, he told me he was going to try to make contact with them. What happened to him? I asked, my mouth dry despite the tea. Mrs. Winters shook her head. The official cause was heart failure, but I found his journal after they took his body away. His last entry said he'd succeeded, that he'd made contact with something during his sleep paralysis and that it was coming through. I felt sick. Why didn't you tell me any of this before I moved in? She looked down at her teacup. Would you have believed me? Besides, it doesn't happen to everyone. Some tenants never experience anything unusual. I thought maybe you'd be one of the lucky ones. That night I packed a bag and checked into a motel. I needed one night of uninterrupted sleep to clear my head and figure out what to do next. But even in the anonymous, sterile motel room, I woke up at 3:17 a.m., paralyzed. The figure was there, standing by the window. It was more distinct now. I could make out the suggestion of facial features, the outline of clothes, modern clothes like jeans and a hoodie. It looked like a normal person except for the absolute darkness that seemed to radiate from it, and the way it moved, too smooth, too deliberate. As I watched, unable to move or scream, it came closer, leaning down over me. For the first time, I heard its voice not just on a recording but right next to my ear, a dry whisper like rustling leaves. You've been reading my work. You know what I discovered, what I became. The paralysis broke suddenly and I sat up gasping. The figure was gone, but the room felt different, charged somehow, like the air before a thunderstorm. I checked out of the motel at dawn and went straight to the university library. I needed to read more of Daniel's research, to understand what he thought he'd discovered, what he might have become. His thesis contained theories about sleep paralysis as a state where the mind exists partially in another dimension, one inhabited by entities that have evolved to interact with humans during this vulnerable state. Daniel had documented his own experiences with sleep paralysis in meticulous detail, describing a figure that started far away and got closer each night. In his final notes, hastily scribbled in the margins, he wrote, I believe I can cross over completely during paralysis. Tonight I will try not to fight it. I will let it take me all the way through. That was his last academic entry. He died that night. I returned to my apartment that afternoon with a new theory forming in my mind. What if Daniel had succeeded? What if he had crossed over, but couldn't come back completely? What if the entity visiting me was Daniel himself, trapped between worlds trying to communicate? That night, I prepared myself. I set up my recording devices again, but this time, I also left out Daniel's thesis open to his final notes. If this was Daniel trying to reach out, I wanted him to know I understood. As expected, I woke at 3:17 a.m., paralyzed. The figure was there, standing at the foot of my bed. But this time, I didn't fight the paralysis. I didn't try to scream or move. Instead, I focused on the figure, trying to communicate with my thoughts since my voice wouldn't work. Daniel? I thought as clearly as I could. Is that you? What happened to you? The figure moved closer, leaning down until its featureless face was inches from mine. I could feel cold radiating from it, smell that same musty cologne scent I'd noticed in my bathroom. Not Daniel, it whispered, its voice somehow inside my head rather than in my ears. Daniel opened the door. I came through. Others followed. Daniel is gone. A cold that had nothing to do with the room temperature spread through me. This wasn't Daniel. This was something else, something that had used Daniel's experiments to cross into our world. What do you want? I managed to think. The figure seemed to smile, though it had no visible mouth. A vessel. Daniel wasn't strong enough. You might be. The paralysis suddenly intensified, the pressure on my chest becoming unbearable. I couldn't breathe. This was how Daniel had died, not from natural causes, but from this thing crushing the life out of him, trying to take over. With every ounce of will I possessed, I fought against the paralysis. I focused on my right hand, trying to move just one finger. The pressure increased, my lungs burning for air. Just as spots began to dance before my eyes, my finger twitched, then my hand, and suddenly I could move again. I gasped for air, scrambling backward against my headboard. The figure remained at the foot of my bed, watching me with that eyeless gaze. "You are stronger than he was," it said, its voice now audible in the room. "But I am patient. I've waited decades. I can wait longer." Then it was gone, fading like mist, leaving behind only that strange smell and a bone-deep chill in the room. I moved out the next day, leaving most of my belongings behind. I crashed on friends' couches for the rest of the semester, making up excuses about plumbing problems in my apartment. I never told anyone the full truth about what happened, but sometimes, even now, years later, I wake up at 3:17 a.m., feeling a weight on my chest and the sensation of being watched. And I wonder if it followed me, if it's still waiting for a moment of weakness, a night when I'm too tired to fight the paralysis. Because the thing about doors is, once they're opened, it's very hard to close them again. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.